Hello and welcome to our first ever episode of Pathway to Excellence with United Centre of Excellence. My name is Amar Danjal. I am Operations and Digital Marketing Lead at the company, and today I'm joined with.
Alan Bates. I'm the Quality Director and I'm responsible for the interfaces between United Centre of Excellence and Ofqual.
Perfect. So, first off, I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of
Not
your
a
day,
problem.
Alan, and coming down and being able to have this conversation. So, what we'll be doing today is just really looking at the framework of EPAOs and understanding what it is that we actually do within the industry. So, to start off with, could you tell me just sort of what is an EPAO?
EPAO is Endpoint Assessment Organisations. United Centre of Excellence is one of many EPAOs. We specifically work in the industry of lean, offering qualifications from level 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 in one specific niche area. So that's where we work with Ofqual to make sure all our qualifications that we certify through apprenticeship standards are regulated.
So, what is the reason why EPAOs exist?
EPOs exist. They was brought in many years ago now to make sure that candidates or apprentices were validated at the end of their EPA period. When they'd completed their NVQs in the past, they were signed off by the training providers. Bringing in EPAOs allows for a final, independent assessment to take place of the apprentice to sign them off as being competent and capable of conducting the jobs that they've been trained to do.
Okay. And as you mentioned, Alan, that it's important for there to be an EPAO and not for the qualification to get put through from a training provider. Why is that so important?
It gives validity to a qualification. Some apprenticeship standards still have built-in qualifications, NVQs. Others don't. So to ensure that there's rigour within the qualifications, endpoint assessments have been brought in to make sure that the candidate is assessed following a plan. All apprenticeship standards have an endpoint assessment plan that's been created by employees and IFATE to make sure that everybody is being treated the same way. That could involve different assessment methods, from professional discussions, from observations, presentations, exams, whichever it is. Not all standards are the same. They do vary from qualification to qualification, but the EPA plan sets out a specific set of what is required by the EPAO, and that is regulated by Ofqual.
Perfect. So just to touch on two organizations that you mentioned there, which is Ofqual and IFATE, could you tell us a little bit more about them
The
organizations?
Institute for Apprenticeship and Training is an organisation that creates the standards with employees. Ofqual is the awarding body of the Office of Qualifications, which is a government led department that ensures the reliability, the stability, the validity of exams and
Mhm.
endpoint assessments by working with endpoint assessment organisations to first and foremost make sure they are Ofqual recognised, which can be a lengthy process but a very thorough one, and it really does help build continuity within EPAO organisations.
Okay, brilliant. Perfect. Now, based on EPAOs, of course, a lot of people out there may be used to the traditional view of going to school, then completing sixth form, to then being able to go to university. So, what's the history behind EPAOs?
EPAOs, as I say, were introduced to help uh, employers get involved in building specific qualifications or standards. So, as we mentioned earlier, not all standards have built-in qualifications. In the past, you was working with frameworks that relied very heavily on NVQ certificates or NVQ qualifications being attached to them.
Hmm.
With an EPAO, a standard may not have any embedded qualifications because they're working with the employer to design training programs that meet the EPA plan of that specific standard they're working to. So the EPAO, the Endpoint Assessment Organisation,
Hmm.
can only um, deliver endpoint assessments to these qualifications once they've been approved by Ofqual. again, it's to make sure that the standards remain constant across the board.
Brilliant. So, just overall touching on everything that we've been able to cover so far with EPAOs, would you say it's fair to see that there is a massive future for employers?
Um, we're only 3 days away from what was a general election,
Hmm.
and I think that's down to where government is going to take the qualifications and what is classed as the levy spend. There's rumours that through Labour they may relax the levy spend, where the levy spend was only allowed to be used on apprentices, which would all need EPAOs. It's still to be seen. Everybody's still very much behind the fact that apprentices will continue in one shape or form. So there's always going to be that reliance on endpoint assessment organisations being the ones that independently check that qualifications are being done correctly and to a right standard. So I don't see that ever slipping back or being replaced. Just maybe the amount of apprentices may change,
Hmm.
but that political landscape will unfold as we move on in the next year or so.
Definitely, definitely. So, based on that and now understanding what EPAOs do, how important would you say the quality is in an EPAO?
It's absolutely paramount. Quality is paramount to make sure that we're giving a standard approach to every apprentice, that our decisions are valid,
Hmm.
they're reliable, and consistent. So, we need to make sure that materials that we use as an EPAO are standardised, so we're giving everybody the same chance using the EPA plan to make sure that they're being dealt with fairly. So, quality is absolutely critical. Constant communication with Ofqual and ourselves, UCE, is an absolute must. They constantly come and ask us for updates on where we're going and what we're doing, of which we would supply them and have a great working relationship with them to be able to build better, stronger, and fairer methods of assessment.
That leads me to my next question. As you were able to say, when it comes to consistency, how do you keep a consistency in an EPAO? How do you manage everyone?
We ensure that we have internal training, we have
Mhm.
standardisation events where we bring our assessing team together to ensure that we are looking at the same materials. There is consistency in the materials that we use to mark exams, to mark observations, to mark assessments in general. Every one of our staff uses the same templates, giving consistency. And then to make that even more robust, we have moderation events to make sure that we look at if there's any patterns developing with assessors. Is somebody awarding more distinctions than
Mhm.
someone else? Is there any patterns developing that we can look at and understand? Does somebody fail somebody more than others? There may be reasons, but we can bring that together as a team, look at it and keep standardising it, moderating it, and making sure that that quality and consistency for the apprentices is maintained.
Definitely. So, just to sort of put that all into a bubble, it's really about making sure that everyone is on that same page and you're always reflecting back to the data that's been
Yes,
given.
yeah, absolutely. Like I say, moderation's an absolute critical part of what we have to do and should be done to make sure that we're getting that validity and consistency in exam marking, in
Mhm.
exam observations, whatever is the assessment that we're undertaking.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, tell me a little bit more about the sort of people that would be involved in an EPAO. So, for myself, of course, handling the operations and digital marketing side, and for yourself being the quality director, what other positions would there be in an EPAO?
Well, one of the most critical ones is the assessors that we work with to ensure that, again, for consistency and validity, they have the right qualifications to assess the subject area that they're assessing. So it's not just a case, without being flippant, it's not just a
Mhm.
case of getting anybody in off the street
Yeah.
and saying, can you go and do this? They need to have industrial experience. They need to have qualifications in assessment. And again, your EPA plan that's set out by IFA will clearly say what the requirements are for the assessing staff. So the assessors that we use, all fully qualified, all fully time served, they know their subject areas. But again, we review that with them through qualifications, checking their qualifications, checking CPD, and more importantly, we go out and we observe them undertaking their assessments to make sure that that maintains the quality that we're looking for.
Definitely. So that sort of leads me then to my next question is, when it comes to an assessor, how do you make sure that they're kept refreshed? So they may have worked in the industry for 20, 30 years, but it may have been so many years
Yeah.
since they've coached and taught someone.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that's maintained?
It's maintained by internal training to make sure that they are brought abreast of modern thinking
Mhm,
and modern techniques. Most of the techniques that we use are pretty hardened, but there's always somebody wanting to put a new badge on something.
mhm.
And even if we take within our lean environment, 5S, you can end up in so many different places that it's 6S, 5S, safety, and they're all the different acronyms. So we have to work very closely with our employers to understand what their meaning of it is, so
Mhm.
we can make fair judgment calls against it. So yeah, training is important, not just for the assessment materials, how we fill them out, but stopping abreast of modern technology and techniques.
Mhm.
Even like with our level 5 qualification, the use of Minitab or Sigma Excel, it's making sure that our guys understand those different changing environments.
Definitely.
One of the most changing environments that we have to contend with at the minute is AI.
That's a big one.
Yeah, so we have to be aware of assessment materials coming in, that have they been generated by things like Chat GPT,
Mhm.
or is it the person's original work? So we also need to make our assessors aware of how to check that they are being done, not just through plagiarism checkers, but simple things like, have we got a Z where a S
It
should
should
be
be.
because it's
Yep.
been Americanized?
Mhm.
And you know quite well that ChatGPT's been very busy in the background.
Yes.
So we have to be mindful of those sort of things as well.
Of course. No, 100%. And I really do appreciate hearing that, because making sure that the assessors are on top of what they need to do is so important,
Mm,
because for a student that comes in, it's a new avenue for them. They're exploring something. So to make sure that the teacher is also fresh with the learning
mm,
material, I find is very, very important.
yeah. And again, one of the things that we need to be aware of with the assessors is to remain non-biased
Hmm.
when they're undertaking an assessment. For the assessor to sit there nodding and yes and agreeing,
It's so natural.
it is so natural, but
Mm,
we also have to train them that, well, look, you have to be almost poker faced, that you don't want to lead an apprentice into any false sense of security that could lead them to believe they've done a great job or a bad job, whichever it might be. So, non biased training
mm.
in body language is quite important, that they understand these things as well.
Definitely. And I can only imagine what some of the assessors may feel when they're under that type of
Yeah,
pressure.
yeah,
So that is definitely something to bear in mind, but fantastic. So when it comes to an EPAO, of course, when you go to university and you may fail an exam, you failed that exam and you know that you just simply have to redo it in the summer. How does that work with EPAOs if you fail something?
yeah. Again, I refer back to the endpoint assessment plan because different endpoint assessment plans can have different resit and retake uh, criteria.
Hmm.
For us, if it's determining whether it is a retake or a resit.
Hmm.
A resit, as it says, is a resit of it could be an exam or an observation, an assessment. And if they fail that again, it's taking that look now. Are these people actually ready, or do they need further coaching, training, and taking it back to a retake that is, well, look, go away and work at this.
Hmm.
Don't keep doing it. It's unfair on the apprentice, but people do fail. It's as simple as that. But
Of course.
it's clearly stated in our toolkits and our apprenticeship guides what them rules of engagement are for retakes and resits. Because, like I say, they can change from qualification to qualification.
Mm. So that sort of leads on to my next question then, Alan. When it comes to further learning through UCE, how is an apprentice meant to know what parts they need to improve on? How are we meant to support them that extra mile?
Yeah, all our assessments that we do or written documentation that literally breaks everyone down into what's called KSBs, knowledge, skills, and behaviours.
Mhm.
So if someone does fail or get a pass or a credit, merit, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
it clearly states which KSB they've dropped marks on for
Okay.
their own personal development, or especially if it's a fail, it clearly states which KSBs they need to go away and work on,
Mm.
as opposed to just receiving a pass, a fail, and then not knowing. And this is also important that that criteria and that level of feedback to training providers
Mhm.
for them to develop their curriculums. So we offer that in we use a system called ACE 360 that allows the training provider to get to that information to be able to analyze out where they can develop their curriculums to give better, higher expectations.
Perfect. So you mentioned they're training providers. So what would you say is the relationship between a training provider and an EPAO?
Again, training provider relationships is absolutely vital. It is for them to understand what our requirements are from an EPA plan. Especially, we've found in the past many people or many training providers that have embedded qualifications. That becomes their absolute focus point,
Mm.
is the embedded qualification.
Right.
And without our guidance, do not take into consideration if a student needs to undertake a professional discussion.
Mhm.
They work on the fact that we've gained the certificate for them, but don't actually prepare them for sitting a professional discussion.
Right.
So it's understanding that and what needs to be within a portfolio, and working very quickly in very early days with an EPAO provider allows you to make sure that you're aligning your curriculum and your reviews with the endpoint assessment, with the endpoint assessment in mind right at the very beginning.
Mhm.
So again, we can't state enough how important it is to have that working relationship with your EPAO.
Definitely. No, I can 100% agree with that. So, for example, with my experience on the operations side, speaking with a lot of clientele, it's so important for them to understand our relationship and who is in control of what, and for us to be as transparent as possible when having that communication.
Absolutely.
So Alan, tell me a little bit about what standards it is that we actually cover as an EPAO.
We cover all of the lean qualifications, starting from level 2, which is lean manufacturing operative,
Mhm.
which is more or less a foundation. Then the level 3, 4, 5, and 6. From anybody from a lean background, it would be the equivalent of a white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, then master black belt.
Sounds a bit like
So
taekwondo.
it does. It's very much that way,
Mhm.
but based, because at the higher you go up, you're beginning to at level 5 and level 6 train other people. So
Right.
you're not just learning yourself, you have to start coaching and training other people to implement the skills that you've learned.
Mhm.
So that is our niche area specifically for lean, not just manufacturing. Lean is very much misunderstood as being a manufacturing tool.
Mhm.
It can be applied in any environment, from offices to warehouses to manufacturing. So
So, based off that, tell me a little bit more. How can lean be implemented in an office space?
exactly same techniques
Mhm.
as in manufacturing, understanding where the non-value added activities are within an office. One of the biggest things that we find in offices is people's desktops that
Yep.
they can't find things on computers because it's all been hid away on a desktop, and I'll find it another day.
Mhm.
So there's all silly little things like that. Even down to in an office, you have KPIs, you have results,
Mhm.
you have targets. How are these monitored? It's only the same as making something. You have a target, measure it, monitor it, report it. Can we make it better? So all the techniques that can be taught at level 2 all the way up to level 6 can be implemented anywhere. Toyota are
Fantastic.
renowned for making cars,
Mhm.
but at the back of that, they still implement all their lean methodologies into offices, sales, servicing. It doesn't just stop with building cars. And I think that translation gets missed.
And where do you think that translation came from?
Sorry, in what respect?
When it comes to Lean Six Sigma mainly being focused within an within a warehouse space or a factory space.
Yeah.
Where do you think that perception came from?
I believe it mainly came from the fact that it's easier to see it when you walk into a warehouse or walk onto a shop floor. You can see when things are out of place, or
Mm,
things are missing, or things aren't ticking properly. You don't see that as easily as when you're looking at a TV screen or
yeah.
somebody's working on a computer. It's not as visual.
Hmm.
But behind every manufacturing facility are computers, systems, processors that, if they're not lean, it's not adding to the front of the manufacturing process in the first place. So, as we say, it can be applied anywhere.
So to sum everything up there, when you come across lean, it's essentially to make the process smoother.
Yeah. Again, different people have different interpretations of what they want from lean. Make it faster, make it smarter, cut out non-value added activities. But the essence of it is, without going into to do too deep, one
Hmm.
process flow and so on, it's about looking at where you are wasting money.
Yeah.
Can we save money? I mean, if you're a banking organisation, you don't need to be like Toyota. You're not making cars.
Hmm.
What you do need to do is understand where your shortfalls are. So it's understanding, using them tools and techniques to understand where your shortfalls are
Hmm.
and how do we improve them.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So I think for a lot of the people that might be listening to this, it's useful for them to understand exactly what lean is, because the concept of lean at the moment is more towards warehouse factories. But like you've just been able to explain there, it can be used in so many different
Absolutely.
environments.
Absolutely. Anywhere.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So let's say you're a training provider and you're out there and you're thinking to yourself, I need an EPAO. How do you make sure you're actually choosing the right one?
That puts me in a very biased position because again, so if I try and answer the question from a non-lean perspective,
Mhm,
the first thing I'd be looking for, if I was looking for an EPAO to work with, would be to look on iFate at who delivers and who's off-qual registered first and foremost.
mhm,
If they're not off-qual registered, you're not going to be able to work with them anyway. So there's a listing on the government websites
mhm.
for registered EPAOs. Then start to filter them out. What do you want? Who can offer you support? Do you do diligence when you're looking for an EPAO? Who can give you supporting materials? Who's there? Or are you talking? It's a it's a personal uh, one of mine that I don't like. Is when you spend all your time talking to one of these robots in the
Mhm.
corner of a
Yeah.
computer. I like talking to people.
Mhm.
So I want to be able to talk to somebody who can explain something to me and not be afraid to go back if I didn't quite understand it first time round. I think we've lost a lot of that, and I mean, speaking from experience, that working with other EPAO organisations,
Mhm.
it's just my preference that I'd sooner be working with a person
Yeah.
that can,
Rather than a robot.
even if they can't give me the answer there and then,
Mhm,
that they can put me in touch with somebody. I want to know I've got that plan, and as we mentioned earlier, I want to be able to do that from day one.
mhm.
Not when a poor candidate has got to endpoint assessment gateway and they're crossing over into the gateway, and we've only done, you know, 8/10 of the job because something wasn't clear.
And that, in essence, that relationship wasn't built
Yes.
between yourself and the
Yeah.
EPAO company. So that's completely understandable. So would you say price is a huge impact on an EPAO?
Price has got to be, in this day and age, price is always going to be some form of judgment.
Mhm.
Would I use price as a judgment? Not always. I want to find the EPAO that I feel comfortable with, that gives me the confidence that is going to be able to help my apprentice understand what's required, understand that when they get to the end point, it's not daunting.
Mhm.
Imagine it's like taking a driving test.
Yeah.
You can go and take lessons and lessons, but sooner or later you've got to take that driving test.
Mm.
And it's exactly the same principle. So when you're picking a driving instructor, do you look for somebody who's cheap
Mhm.
or somebody who's got a good track record of getting people
Across the line.
across the line?
That's
So
it.
the same thing applies.
100%. That's fantastic. So something that I'm quite curious about, because at this moment in time we've been really focused on EPAOs. I now want to look at it from an apprentice perspective. So you mentioned portfolio,
Mhm.
you mentioned professional discussion. What exactly are they?
Well, again, this is specific. I will now come specific back into UCE's specific endpoint assessments. Uh, all of the qualifications that we assess require some form of interview,
Hmm.
some form of discussion, professional discussion, and it's ensuring that the apprentice is aware of how to conduct this. Even sitting here today,
Hmm.
it can be quite daunting.
Of course.
So for somebody not to be prepared for having sit and have a conversation,
Hmm.
that's why we need to work again with a training provider, make it clear in our documentation that this is what will be expected. The apprentice needs to have practiced how to answer these questions.
Hmm.
I mean, there are situations. It is called a professional discussion. How does the apprentice know how to act professionally if they're not being guided, taught, and explained?
Hmm.
You know, slumping in a chair or falling asleep on a desk.
Yeah.
Does that set the impression of a professional discussion?
Mm.
So the professional discussion is it needs to be explained clearly to them,
Hmm.
and more times than not, the professional discussion is underpinned by a portfolio of evidence,
Okay.
which you asked about. And again, the EPA plan clearly states what the requirements are. As a minimum, it might be 13 pieces of evidence from the workplace, but make sure that the apprentice understands what's in the portfolio. That
Mm.
might sound strange,
It might sound a bit self-explanatory.
but sometimes you can sit in front of an apprentice and say, this is a great piece of evidence. Can you talk me through it? And they've never seen it before. So it can, you know, I did that a year and a half ago. I don't remember it. They
Mm.
need to be prepared for what is in that portfolio. They understand how to talk you through it. That's their show and tell. That's their showcase.
Mm.
So portfolios are absolutely critical for an apprentice when they sit in a professional discussion. Even if they're having a little bit of mind fog,
Hmm.
or they've got their portfolio there to
To look back
I'm
at.
back on track again.
Yeah. Fantastic. And give me an example of evidence. Could that be a piece of paper? Is it a document, a picture?
Yeah, again, depending on the qualification,
Hmm.
it could be a work instruction that they've created,
Hmm.
examples of in our industry an A3, a project that they've worked on, minutes of meeting. It could be endless on what the actual evidence could be. But again, I come back to stress, more importantly, understand what that is and what you're trying to say.
Hmm.
As part of the portfolio, you will be expected to map it against the knowledge, skills, and behaviours.
Hmm.
So be prepared to understand if you've put in a risk assessment as an example, you know why it meets that knowledge, that skill, and then behaviours. So you will be possibly expected to expand on what that
Mm.
information is.
Because as an EPAO, it's not our responsibility to provide that training
No,
to the apprentice, is it?
it's not. No, but it's our responsibility to give clear guidance on
Hmm.
what they can expect, which comes in the form of our apprenticeship guides, which makes it clear what they can expect of every aspect of the assessment, whether that be a multiple choice exam,
Hmm.
whether it be an observation, about bringing their um, ID. So it clearly steps out every stage and what is needed.
So, for example, now going back to the traditional route of university, you don't get to see that exam. Not until you sit in that room and you're sat in that chair and that paper lands in front of you. How does it work with apprenticeships?
With apprenticeship, it is very much that same way, but they've got the advantage of being able to do mock exams, which I'm sure still happens in
Yeah.
university. So it's not that dissimilar.
Hmm.
But with the exams, they can be done online now, not just sat in and doing a paper
So not in a
exam.
massive PE room
Yeah,
and
yeah. So they're not sat in a giant gym
Mhm.
with 400 other tables. They can do it. We use a proctoring service that looks at the the computer system. It looks at the actual apprentice who's undertaking it to make sure that there's no, I don't like the word, but I'm going to have to use it, they're not cheating.
Yeah.
And that's what the proctoring service does. The exams that we undertake at level 3 and 4 are open book,
Hmm.
but again, the candidates need to understand that they need to know their subject areas in advance. For somebody just to go in with an open book approach, they're not going to pass successfully if they're relying on just doing their own work on the day of the exam.
Yeah,
They've not got the time to do that.
of course. I mean, for example, with the exam on level 3 or level 4, what sort of the time limits are on them
Oh,
exams?
I think is it 40? I can't remember now off the top of my head. I think it's 40 minutes, I think,
Okay.
for the level 3, but I'd have to check. I can't remember that detail off the
Hmm.
top of my head.
So, for example, they can't be flicking through their book
No,
for sort of 20 minutes if
no.
they've only got 40 minutes for the
Yeah, it's
entire
40
exam.
questions. That's right. It's 40 questions.
So,
So,
mm,
no, they haven't got the time to be doing that. So they need to know. But again, one of the things we do with our assessment materials that we share with our training providers
mhm.
is all of the knowledge and skills are documented, and you make it quite clear that that's the only place that the multiple choice questions will come from. So, because it's such a broad spectrum of subject areas, Lean,
Mhm.
I remember somebody telling me on the last scope there was something like 830 different tools and techniques.
Wow.
How are you going to remember them all?
I could
You're
probably just
not.
remember 50.
Well, that's exactly it. So, the materials that we supply to training providers there's the bare minimum. If
Mm,
they need to go above that, that's their requirement. But that's the only place that the exam questions will be coming from.
brilliant. And you mentioned about these packs and these documents that, for example, UC are able to provide for training
Yes.
providers. If you're a viewer or you're a listener, where can you actually find these documents?
If you wanted to look at these materials, on the top right hand side of our website, there is a login function. And if you go onto that, you can register. You don't need to be a customer of UCE.
Mhm.
It's all there for people to share. The information makes great guidance. Obviously, it makes even more sense if you're working with UCE
Of
because
course.
it mirrors what we're doing.
Mhm.
But it makes great uh, supplementary training materials for anybody. Or if you've printed it out, you can either use it for training materials or it makes a very good coffee coaster,
Yeah.
depending on what you want to use it for.
So just to clarify there, with the documentation, even though there is a login function, there's no cost attached to that, is
No,
there?
no cost at all. No cost.
Fantastic.
All we
Fantastic.
ask is if anybody goes and use it and they find something that we could improve or better, contact us and let us know.
Definitely. So, as United Centre of Excellence, what would you say is one of our mission statements? What are some of the key ethics that we believe in at this company?
Well, one of the key strategies is, as we mentioned earlier, is face-to-face contact, is to make sure that we are listening to our training providers that we work with,
Mhm.
listening to our apprentices. Without them, we're nothing. So we've got to listen to what they're telling us. But it's all got to be about the person behind, whether it be on Teams or whether it be on a phone call.
Mhm.
We need to be able to listen to what they're telling us and
100%.
give for them to also feel comfortable in giving us feedback to develop our company. So we're all giving each other, and especially the apprentice, a better learner journey.
So, for some people, they don't tend to like feedback. You may want to help them, but they may see feedback as a point of where you are ruining a reputation for them. Why is it that you value feedback?
I value feedback because without it, we are just flailing around aimlessly. We're not listening to our customers. So
Mhm.
feedback, whether it be feedback to us or us giving feedback to a training provider,
Mhm.
you know what they do with that feedback is their prerogative.
Of
But
course.
we want to make sure that they at least know from feedback if they have a potential weakness in their curriculum that they can develop. And likewise for us, if somebody can see a weakness in us, point it out.
Mhm.
It's not critical. It's not criticism. It's developing a better way of working.
So, would it be fair to say here at UC we believe in development and growth?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if we can keep working with people, we want to be able to move on and expand our portfolio of EPAO offerings. We've said that our key uh, standards
Hmm.
are all lean, but we're looking long term to be able to expand them into other areas, such as quality practitioner, that have a lot of the same embedded requirements of what lean do. So we're not watering down our offering, we're expanding
Hmm.
our offering to people, and other customers are coming and asking us for these things. So we have to listen to our customers' requirements.
100%. So just going back to something that you mentioned earlier in regards to us having a change of party in the government.
Oh yes.
So quite a big one. How do you feel that's going to impact the education industry?
It's going to be very hard to say. I don't expect to see any massive moves for at least a year.
Hmm.
They're going to have, whether they like it or not, the honeymoon period,
Hmm.
and whether the honeymoon period lasts longer, it's to be seen. But uh, I'm hoping that they do relax the levy,
Hmm.
because I think there's a lot of opportunities for company to grow, for employers to grow their workforces. Not everybody's keen on apprentices or apprenticeships, not apprentices.
Hmm.
And not everybody's keen on apprenticeships because of the time frames.
Mm.
When you look at some of these qualifications, they could be done probably sooner, or they don't want to commit so many people to these. They have businesses to run, so it's to be seen. It's a very open question with a very open answer.
Definitely,
So,
definitely. So, Alan, I just want to say a massive thank you again for taking time out of your day and
oh,
being
thank
able
you.
to spend time with me, just going over sort of the key basics of what an EPAO is,
Yeah.
what it is we do, and in a way, how important EPAOs are in the education industry as well.
Yes.
So I want to thank you again. And of course, we will be doing another episode where we will be touching on it a little bit more towards the quality assurance. So looking at the quality of the EPAO, the
No problem.
assessment templates.
I look forward to it.
Brilliant. So, Alan, thank you again.
Thank you very much.